Hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And a couple more holiday cards for my 2024 holiday card series. As always, at the very end of the video, I will post a link to the playlist that I will continue to add to as I get Christmas and holiday cards made. Today, did a bunch of die cutting, a little bit of ink blending, adding some paste to create like faux snow with some glitter. Couple types of splatter, all the things I love. As always, I will have links to everything I used in the description box below the video. So there's a full supply list, links to everything I used. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I do get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It is what helps pay the bills, keeps the channel going. I think that's it for the housekeeping. Let's get into making the cards. Alrighty, so I am using the Simon Says Stamp Tall Poinsettia and Pine Needle Cluster wafer dies. These are newer. I've used the Pine Needle Cluster in a previous video. This Poinsettia, oh, lurv. I have been just itching to use it. It's so pretty. So pretty. I have a thing, I've talked about this before. I have a thing for poinsettia, like stamps and wafer dies. Love them. I do generally multiple, from all sorts of different brands. You do multiple cards over the holidays using poinsettias because they're fun. So I die cut the floral portion from pink cardstock. I used Altenew pink diamond cardstock. And then I am just adding some depth and dimension with some Simon Pawsitively saturated inks. Specifically, Carnation is the first one I'm using. And then I'm going to go in with PEONY to just deepen it up a bit. And I've got the die cuts stuck to one of Simon's grip mats. And I'm using my Waffle Flower 1 Plus shader brushes to add the ink. And the thing to remember with these inks and most of the inks are that they do soften and dry back. So just always keep that in mind. Like everything's going to look darker right now when I first apply the ink and then it softens, dries back. You can also do like white cardstock and ink blend. I've shown that in a ton of videos. Like just die cut everything from white cardstock and then just add all your color with inks. Note though, and I'll talk about this more when I'm adding the paste. I specifically went with color cardstock and I'm only adding the ink blending towards the centers anyway. There was a reason for this, and it's when I get to the paste, I'll explain more. So, added my inks to all of these die cut pieces, and it just gives it, that little extra bit. And it's simple. It's kind of another one of those things you can kind of get a little mindless with, do all your die cutting, stick all the pieces down, and then just add that extra depth with ink. The blending is easy because you're doing color on color, so you don't have to worry too much, and that's it. It's super simple. So once I was done with the florals, I wiped off my grip mat so I'm not mixing the pink ink and the greens together. And then the poinsettia stems I had die cut from some green cardstock. That was Altenew Reindeer Moss cardstock. And then the pine clusters I die cut from Altenew Mountain Pine cardstock. And then for the ink blending on those, I started with Artichoke Pawsitively saturated ink. Same thing, using a little Waffle Flower shader brush. And then I'll go in with Kale, which is the darkest shade. And I do use the darker shade on the pine branches. You see it at first, but in the end, it does fade back quite a bit because that cardstock's a fair bit darker. But I didn't put a whole ton of, effort into the ink blending. Like, I'm just slapping the ink on. On the branch, I did a little bit more, I added that depth because it does give it that little extra something. But on the branches, once you start getting into really dark cardstocks, a lot of times, if you want anything to show up, you basically, like, your only option for the most part is black ink, which I'll get to. I'm going to use that too, but again, we'll get to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I just use like the edge of the brush for the pine branches and just kind of slap some ink on down the centers. But for that, honestly, in the end, you could skip that. It's kind of pointless because dark cardstock, not a whole lot you can do with it. So I added a bit more to the branches because I just love them. And then I set them aside. Now I'm getting into one of my darkest cardstocks. This is Simon Says Stamp's Midnight Green cardstock, which on camera, I know it looks, for a lot of people, it looks black. I will actually show later. I grab a piece of black cardstock just to show, because every time I use this cardstock, I get a lot of comments about like the black, and I was like, I didn't use it. It's green, but it's a dark green, like really dark. Love it. Love it. Also love this embossing folder. Oh my gosh. This is the Splendid Snowflakes 3D embossing folder from Simon. Like, look at it. It's so pretty. It's so pretty. So I ran these pieces of cardstock through with that embossing folder. Love. And then I had purposely cut them a little bit bigger just to give me a little bit of wiggle room just in case. Because sometimes if you want your embossed panel to be a certain size, it's better to have the cardstock a little bit bigger, because when you run it through an embossing folder, it will, it's pressing the cardstock, up and down and into all the little designs. And sometimes that'll make the cardstock panel itself like shrink a bit. And I wanted these to stay A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I started larger and then just trimmed them to the size I needed once they were embossed, and then we're good to go. So, ink blending. I'm using Simon's Pine Positively Saturated ink, which right now it shows up, but it will dry. And when it's fully dry, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell. But I started with this, and I'm using a larger blending brush, and I'm just blending around the perimeter. You could totally skip this step, but I wanted to add that extra just depth, and I was having fun with it. But again, it's gorgeous as is, but I started with the pine, and now I'm going with black. And black ink intimidates people, but I've shown in other videos, like, you can add black ink as shading, and it creates beautiful depth. It depends on how you do it. With a cardstock like this, it just works, and again, you can't really tell. But like I said, I will pull out a piece of black cardstock and just compare, and you can actually see just how deep of a green this cardstock is. I love it. Anyway, blended black ink around the perimeter just to build up that depth. And once these backgrounds had their ink blending, of course I'm going to add a bunch of splatter to them. So I put them in my splat box. I'm going to do 2 types of splatter. I'm going to use my Picket Fence Studios Paper Splatter Watercolor Liquid White Snowflake, one of my go-tos. I use this so much. I've nearly used up an entire bottle of this stuff because I love it. It's shimmery and beautiful. So I put that on a palette, use my fan brush, splattered it all over the background. And then the other splatter is titanium white gouache. Put a bit of that on not titanium white, permanent white, because there's a difference technically. The permanent white, for the most part, does not, it stays more true to white. I've talked about this in other videos though. Sometimes, again, it depends on what you're splattering on top of. As it's drying, it can absorb inks, different things. I don't worry about it too much, but this one, for the most part, again, stays pretty true to white. Heavily splattered that after I'd watered it down a bit. So then I've got these just snowy, textured, very, very dark backgrounds. And then I set them aside. So now I'm going to assemble my poinsettias, which is super simple. Just the 2 layers and the stem, that's it. You could, and I thought about it, but I didn't do it, but you could double up the die cuts if you wanted to make it look like a really, really full. So you'd have 2, stagger the 2 larger ones, and then add, stagger and add the 2 smaller ones, and create, very, very full clusters of poinsettias. But I just use them as is, and I was okay with that. But it's another option. So you just adhere the 2 layers, kind of however you want, but I just followed the packaging, and then adhere them to the stems, and that was it. Super, super simple. Love it. And all that pierced texture, fabulous. So once they're assembled, I'm going to add paste. This is why I went with color cardstock. You will have to test this, and it doesn't matter what brand of paste you use. I would just test it to see, because obviously I want my paste to remain white. So this is why I went with colored cardstock and kept the ink blending to the centers, because a lot of times, just like with splatter, as the paste is drying, it can absorb the ink underneath it if you did ink blending. And pinks can be bad, because pinks and reds, those dyes and pigments are just notorious. Purples also fall in that category because they use pinks and reds to make purple. So if you wanted to ink blend some die cuts and add paste, I just recommend taking a scrap of paper, do your ink blending, let it dry, add some paste on top of it, and let that dry and see what happens. And if the paste absorbs the ink, then you know that you need to either die cut or use different inks or just, change what you're planning. For this, since I use the color cardstock, I ain't worried about it. It's going to stay white. I applied the paste around just the edges of the petals and the leaves. I just used a brush to do this, and I was just tapping it on. So I get that kind of frosty, snowy sort of look. And then while the paste was still wet, I was taking a little pinch, literally, just pinching some glitter. This is Simon's Unicorn Dust Glitter, which is iridescent and sparkly. Tim Holtz Distress Rock Candy would look amazing for this as well. I just went with this because I wanted the more iridescent sparkle. But if you want to keep it more like almost true to snow looking sparkle, that's where the rock candy is like perfect for. But again, I wanted more sparkly, but whatever works. And by pinching it and sprinkling it that way, I wasn't like dumping it on top, so it's not like solid glitter, because I want the paste to show too. So I was just using a coffee filter, scrap paper works too, and just like so, just pinching it and doing just a light little dusting over these pieces. And then tap off the excess, let it dry, which didn't take very long. Super simple. And yeah, by getting your fingers in it, you are going to get glitter everywhere. The unpaid intern has glitter on his face. Probably still does, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many times you shower, wash your face, everything else. If you're getting glitter on yourself, it's getting everywhere. This is why I say glitter is the herpes of the craft world. It kind of shocks people when I say that, but it is the truth. Loose glitter just is, but it doesn't bother me. I kind of get a kick out of it, and it's pretty. It's funny finding random little sparkles all over the house. It ends up everywhere. It really does. Anyway, for the little pine branches, I just slapped on the paste with my little paintbrush. It's just a little cheapo paintbrush that I keep in my stash. And I didn't add glitter to these ones because I didn't feel like it was necessary. I wanted to keep the glitter just on the poinsettias. This, I just wanted that like white texture paste. This is Altenew texture paste, by the way. But like I said, any white texture paste pretty much will probably work for this. The brush I washed out as soon as I was done. And the paste, I put press and seal on all my jars of paste. It just adds an extra seal. You can cut a bigger piece and press it down to remove all the air. That also, I would recommend that more with like glitter paste, things like that. I've talked about this a lot. Paste does not last forever. Do not hoard it. Use your paste. It will only last so long. It's just the nature of it. But adding press and seal does help. I do have a link to it because Simon Says Stamp ships internationally because it is hard for people outside of North America to find. We can get it like at our grocery stores. Internationally, not easy to find. So Simon Says Stamp ships it everywhere, and there's so many things you can do with it. It's wonderful. I've shown in a bunch of videos, not going in on the whole press and seal thing, but I keep a box of it in my craft area, and 99% of the time I just use it to prolong the life of my paste. Anyway, while said paste was drying, I used sentiments from the Holiday Messages stamp set, and I'm using that same Midnight Green cardstock. And you saw I used my anti-static powder tool and I stamped the sentiments multiple times with clear embossing ink. And you could see on screen how like the layers of embossing ink, how much darker it got. I've talked about this a lot more recently. I find that stamping multiple times, because then you're getting more layers of that clear sticky ink, and it gives more surface area for the embossing powder to cling to, especially with sentiments or images that are more solid like this. Because yeah, if you only stamp it once and you're not getting full coverage with the ink, there's not very much for the embossing powder to cling to, and that's why your embossing powder sometimes will look a little sketchy. The other thing to remember is when you're heat embossing, the minute it's melted, move your heat tool. If you overheat it, it will liquefy, sink into your cardstock. That's also why you'll get that splotchy, kind of patchy look, and it doesn't look right. 99% of the time, you're probably just overheating it, and you just need to move your heat tool away faster. Okay, so after I did that, I removed the excess anti-static powder with my microfiber cloth, and then set those aside after I die cut them. And then I'm using the same sentiment set on the inside of the card, lined all the sentiments up, as well as my poinsettia, because I was going to add just the poinsettia itself to the inside just to give it that little extra something. And these are from the Holiday Messages set, these sentiments. So I stamped the Have A and Christmas, companion sentiments with green ink, and then the large Merry word I stamped with the pink ink. And my card base is a top folding A2 white note card, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then I adhered my poinsettia. And then now I pulled out the black cardstock so you can see. There's my background with the midnight green That's how dark this green is, but it is green. It's not black. You could do black though. I was gonna. And then I was like, wait, I've got this gorgeous dark green cardstock, so I used that instead. Black would have looked amazing too. I just wanted that really dark background so that this poinsettia would really pop, you know, off of it. So once I've got my, you know, background is ready to go, I'm going to adhere my little pine branches. You know, all the paste is dry, everything's good to go. So I created a little cluster with the branches, which I adhered first. Once those are adhered into place, I took some thin foam squares and I popped them underneath the petals. I don't do this very often, more so because I'm lazy, honestly. But this does, you know, add a bit of dimension and doesn't create a whole lot of bulk because I'm using the thin foam squares from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm tucking them under more towards the outer edge of the petals because the center I'm still going to glue down. So because I'm using the thinner foam squares, this isn't going to be like as dimensional. If you used regular thickness foam squares, it'd be more obvious and it would look great, but I just wanted to create a small amount of dimension. So did all of that and then added the liquid adhesive to the center and down the stem and whatnot, adhered it into place, and then as always wrapped some baker's twine around my card front here, and then reverse tweezers for the win to hold the knot in place so I can sit and fiddle, get my bow the way I want it. And then once I'm happy with it, I can trim off the excess with my scissors. And then for the sentiment, I had die cut a second piece from a scrap just to adhere to the back of it to give it a little bit more dimension as well as a bit more strength because I'm going to use some foam tape on this. And I'd also stamped a companion sentiment from the same set and white heat embossed it onto the same pink cardstock and trimmed that down. And again, added just a little scrap, just a little strip of the cardstock. Again, just gives it that little extra heft, really. And then to adhere them, I'm using some waffle flower thin foam strips. And I just put it along the top of the large piece word, leaving that gap because it's getting adhered over top of that baker's twine. So that's going to pop that into place. And then I had added the sentiment strip. So now I've got my sentiment in place. And then I can adhere this to my card base. And because I had purposely, you know, embossed it and then trimmed it down so it's A2 size, this will completely cover my card base. So use my craft tacky glue, adhered that into place onto the card. And then as my final little bit of embellishment, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Pawsitively Everything Gems. These are the ones in butter, which is like a light yellow. To me, it's like almost like a kind of goldy sort of color. It's pretty. So I used one as the flower center and then clustered several more around the image. Just, you guys know, I like my bling. So I fiddled around until I was kind of happy with the placement and then just picked them up with my embellishment wand and adhered them into place with the craft tacky glue. And once I finished it on the first card, I just repeated the exact same steps on the second card as I tend to do, you know. So once everything's adhered, I just got to let the glue dry and these cards are complete. So we've got texture and splatter and the, you know, frosty look of the embossing paste with a bit of glitter. I forgot to turn on my phone to show the sparkle, but it's there. It's there and it's pretty. So yeah, these were fun. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Like I mentioned in the intro, I will have a list of everything I used. It'll be listed and linked in the description box below the video. So you just got to expand that and it'll all be there. And then I'll link to my playlist at the end, all the things. Thumbs upping and commenting, very much appreciated. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!